thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful presentation. That's the subject I'm going to be discussing. It's spirituality as resistance and healing. So I'm going to go through a couple of warrior women that were resistance fighters, and then I'm going to give you a little bit about the practical aspect of African spirituality. I've lost myself, so I don't know if I can just keep speaking. It's not sounding as it was before. So I'm going to then go through some practical things that one can do to heal when it feels that you're burdened by some kind of depression or something like that. And I'll be using myself as the primary example for that. Okay. Right, so I don't know. Okay, this is coming up now. This is just to say that in our African spiritual systems, we see God as something that is within, as has been said already. We see something as God is the divine that's within us. So this is a quotation from Nefer Amen. In our religions, or the religions of the dominant cultures today, people are directed outside of themselves to scriptures, sermons from priests, etc., for their moral and spiritual guidance. But in contrast, African and some Oriental cultures direct their members from within. And sometimes that aspect of going in produce or induce a state that's called trance or spirit possession for intuitive guidance for the same ends. So this is just to give you, as I said, the profile of some of the warrior women. I'm particularly focusing on women. We'll know, obviously, that there were men as well. I kind of lost it. But the previous slide was showing Al-Khem-I, who was a priestess who fought against the, there it is, it's come back. She was a priestess and also called a soothsayer or a sorcerer, and you can see in there also called a witch. Now, someone else has determined that narrative of what a witch is, what a sorceress is, and all of these things. But basically, she fought against Arab invasion. She was resisting Arab or Islamization of her peoples at this particular period in time. Really strong sense of empowerment in terms of what a woman could do. There was no contest, in fact, in those times about whether a woman could go to war and defend their kingdom, their realm. So you can actually look her up. I don't have time to really do like deep briefs about them, but it's just to say here that somebody else tells a narrative, and the supposed conquerors tell a narrative, and the narrative slants the power and the effect of what some of these women were able to achieve. But because we're focusing on the spiritual aspect as well as obviously the warrior fighter, often we don't hear the warrior aspect, rather the spiritual aspect. We only tend to hear about the resistance, the warrior. We never really think about what were their resistance and what were they using to resist. Well, this is an example that Al-Khem-I, and this wasn't necessarily her name either. This was a term that the Arabs gave her, Al-Khem-I, meaning for them the priestess, the soothsayer. But she was a real spiritual leader of her people, as we'll come down later to see with other warriors after her. We can't be sure about her age exactly, if she really was 127. But for the Muslim historian Ibn Khaldun, she lived quite old anyway. But also below there you can see that she died in battle or committed suicide. We don't know, because the historical narrative doesn't quite say as clearly as it should, because again, somebody else is telling the story. And here, this is showing, it's not showing exactly as I would have liked it necessarily, but it's just showing about priestess power. This is not necessarily an absolute depiction of what she looked like, but they knew that she was mixed, so she's coming from different groups, different ethnic groups. And this is here just talking about what it means when somebody that's identified as a priestess or a sorceress, or somebody that can go into trance, as we saw with Nefer's quotation, what happens? They go into this heightened state of awareness and are able to ultimately divine, to predict, or rather to prophesy about what the future is. So as much as her military strength and power the enemies, those that were invading her territory, were also quite afraid of that particular power as well, and for which reason it would become something that they disregard and demonize. Many of you know Nanny of the Maroons. This is just another example, so I don't need to elaborate on her. But what I wanted to do was to focus on the fact that this aspect, as the quotation here is saying, I was schooled in the green-giving ways of the roots and vines, made accomplice to the healing acts of chainy root, fever grass, and vervain. This is from a poem by Lorna Goodison. Now, Nanny is the subject of many, for writers certainly, she inspires them, particularly not just the resistance part, but the spiritual part, which tends to be taken for granted as something that she actually did. She's elected, so the story goes, to come and fight for her people in the territory that was Jamaica, and she served as a spiritual leader, ensuring that the community that we again know as the Maroons they maintained some of those traditions, spiritual. They know what the herbs can do, and she would use those herbs. Obviously, when you imagine you're at war with these people, there'll be people that are coming wounded. There'll be people coming with their minds kind of confused and messed up, traumatized. What do you think Nanny was doing with her powers and her ability to use that to transform them and to heal them? Those systems of healing still is maintained in those communities. And Grace Nichols, who is another is a Guyanese writer, she talks here about, she calls and recognizes that Nanny, which is really Nana, an Ashanti priestess, and she was a giver of charms, someone who nurtured spirit and combined guerrilla tactics with African magic as a means of resistance. And it's really important that we understand that, these things weren't just separate. She wasn't like, I'm a resistance leader, and then on the other hand, I'm a priestess, or, it was all part and parcel of that resistance power. Now, what we would understand is to be, the word is dropped off there, I don't know if it is for you, but it's a form of sacred science that she was using to be able to manipulate and understand how to use herbs. Is sacred because obviously it's from the universe, it's from the forces, the natural forces of nature. We have come to understand that as obia, a word that is steeped in all kinds of mysticisms, which I'll go into a bit later. So I wanted us to, this is about, it kind of fast-forwarded itself, where the practice of obia, or understanding the sacred science, is part of my own journey when I wanted to find out more about myself, which I will come to again in a bit. But if you're in a state where you're actually trying to do that, something is going on with you mentally, and you have the foresight or the inner sight to check yourself, these are the systems or the tools that are available to us to enable us to do that. So you go and visit an obia man or an obia woman. I actually visited, in my case, an obia man. He wouldn't necessarily call himself that. I'm using that particularly for this case. He might be otherwise called a spiritualist or a spiritual practitioner, a man who knew science. He knew how to draw out from you that which is within and align you as much as he is capable of, bearing in mind that everything is within me to source. I just need somebody to trigger it, direct it. Remember also, I'm already triggered in a particular way, and that's why I've come to this person. But anyway, if you put in Google just a simple search for obia, you can see there, I did this today, you can do this anytime, you'll see a bag of confusion, really, because, I don't know, there's all kinds of crazy going on there. But I wanted to point to you to the picture, on the fourth picture at the top, and that's a man and a woman who were actually charged or tried for practicing what obiaism, for using that sacred science during the times of enslavement in Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean as well. They were tried for practicing that because it was outlawed. I don't have time to go into that now, but you can actually look that up as well. The obia was outlawed. In fact, it remains something that you can't legitimately use in a lot of these territories. Some of them are still trying to fight so that it can be legitimized as a healing as a healing practice. But it's just for us to understand. This is my book on Guyanese Comfort, which is an African-derived spiritual practice pertinent to Guyana, which is where I'm from. And this is me giving you some kind of idea of the definitions of Obia, which is, again, steeped in a whole heap of controversies throughout. But some of the territories or the spiritual practitioners, like in say, Suriname, don't have a sort of a fear about Obia. They recognize Obia as power. And so if you have Obia, they'll be like, you have Obia, that means that you have the power to divine, you have the power to understand the uses of herbs, and you would do that. So this is what I was saying here. And in this quotation, it was saying that during the period of enslavement, the ideas or the concept of the power of Obia, the traditional priests, let's so-called, of Al-Khem-I, that's what they were called in Ghana, say, who would use, let's say, sacred science in a positive way to sort of challenge any negative things that's taking place in the community. There were another set, this is the argument, another set who would do the opposite. But in the context of the enslavement period, the two were conflated because they recognized they had a common enemy. The common enemy was the enslavers. So they were like, well, we can use our science to defeat and fight the enemy. And so what I'm arguing here, this is from me, is essentially Obia's connection to slave revolts and British anxieties about its power that continues to equate the practice of Obia, or Obiaism, with savage African customs and barbarity, superstitious nonsense, and mumbo-jumbo, which is what most of us have in our minds. That you see the baggage that I showed you before, that kind of confusion. We don't really understand what Obia is, and it was because ultimately there were people like Taki of the 70-60 rebellion, as well as obviously Nana, Queen Nana, who used those systems, who used that sacred science to fight the enslavers. So they just conflated it, and they, after the slavery period, they actually established a whole heap of churches all over the place, so that you would not be really thinking about your the practices that you were familiar with, because it's linked to resistance. This is just saying that I'm going to be doing a bit more on actually Guyanese comfort soon. And this is another of our warrior priestesses. Most people probably don't know about her. This is coming from the so-called the French colonial effort, colonial mission into modern-day Nigeria. And her name is Sarunya. I suggest that if you don't know Sarunya, who's a priestess, now she's like, that is what I am. And her defense is against this mission that was two French it's barbarians, basically. I'm trying to find the right word. Ultimately, they're barbarians who were aggressing into this area that is her Asna people. They'd already colonized, or rather the Arabs had colonized a portion of this area. The French were trying to get in to this area, and Queen Sarunya refused to allow them. She was using her spiritual practices to deflect them. But she was also using the spiritual practice against the others who had been colonized by the Arabs, and they were therefore practicing Islam. So they were rejecting her continuation of the spiritual system that she knew. So what happened when the French were aggressing into her area, the Asna people, her territory, those leaders or those chiefs actually sort of betrayed her, were ganging up with the French to try and colonize her, to conquer her. Very, very brilliant story that you can actually see on YouTube. There is, well, there was a full feature film which we screened not too long ago at the BFI. I want to see if this little. Sorry, I want them to turn it down because it literally screamed at me. Okay. Okay, I'll stop that there deliberately now because I want you to go and look for this film, Sarunia. It's a film by Ahmed Hondo. But in the clip, at the beginning, there was one of the French soldiers who was screaming because he feared, or rather they feared, the fact that she was this sorceress in their minds, and in the people, the other groups in the area, they feared her power. But at the same time, they wanted to defeat her, because if they defeated her, then they could show to the other people her power is meaningless, it's insignificant. Look, we were able to defeat her. And at one point, the man that you saw screaming, which was a soldier, he looked into a jar, and these bees swarmed at him. So he actually got terrified and thought it was the spirituality that did it, but it was something else, a reason why that was. But it's important to understand that these were 10 French soldiers, thereabouts, had hundreds of enslaved Africans carrying their weapons, carrying their foods, carrying their everything. And in one crazy moment, and we could put this down to the power of Sarunia and what she did, they ended up imploding. But we don't know that story. The French soldiers, the ones that were leading the campaign, ended up fighting and ended up killing each other. This is like a phenomenal story of resistance, and she was undefeated. She was able to mobilize the different peoples around the territory, and she was saying in a real Pan-Africanist speech, we need to respect each other, we need to respect our different systems. So actually try and see that film. I don't have too much time to go into. So then I just want to lead on to the healing aspects and my story. So at some point in my journey, when I was at university, I had what they would call depression or some kind of psychic altered state, something that was going on that they couldn't understand. I couldn't understand it at the time either. But let's just call it depression, or rather I am going to actually call it an awakening that was taking place that I wasn't really aware of at the time. But intuitively, remember previously Brother Dali was talking about things that are inside, or even myself at the beginning, I'm talking about God being within. I'm also talking about your ancestors and those forces being within you. So something, let's call it that then, told me, or inspired me to draw this circle. This is not the real one, this is me remaking it later on. This circle, put my name, which it was then at the time, in the center, and then put the names of my ancestors around it. I had by this point stopped dealing with Jesus, stopped dealing with the white God, I passed that. And I put created this circle, all right? So, and I said to them, listen, I don't know what's going on, but whatever's going on, I'm calling on you to sort it out, to help me, whatever. Yeah, I parked it up there. Now, my grandfather appeared in a dream to me, and this is where I incorporate the ancestral voices that you hear, which might otherwise be determined you're hearing voices. Well, there's another way you can really think about what those voices are and what they're telling you. I intuited and therefore chose to accept that the energy that I was feeling and picking up was that it was my ancestors, and it was particularly my grandfather and also my grandmother. Grandfather told me to go back to Ghana from where I was born in that tree. I did this. I call this visiting the interior because the interior, symbolically, metaphorically, is myself. I'm going into myself. The picture that you see on the far right, I'm in that truck because I chose to stay in the truck. And we're going into the interior of Guyana, and that person that you see there is navigating that truck across this that's supposed to be a bridge. But the truck would quite easily fall over. But I was adventurous at this time, and I thought, I'm going in, I want to see what's going on. And this, I will say, I've lost the transmission, so I'll just wait until it comes back. I don't know if it's a battery or what, but you can see that. But yeah, so that was me going into the interior of Guyana, where, to be fair, it was probably the most transforming, as Brother Daniel was earlier saying, the most transforming experience that I encountered on this journey. At that time, or later on, I then had another name, which is Michelle Stobie. The transformation, the changes, the journey is quite long, it's quite deep. Because of the depression or the experience that I vaguely mentioned, I wasn't able to complete my studies. It would take me another few years to do that, but eventually I did it. But because of the importance and the significant experience that I was having, I wanted to understand what it was. I refused to believe the narrative that it was a psychosis of a particular order, that it was schizophrenia, that I just refused to accept this. There was that intuitive force within me that was steering me away from that narrative. And so when I came out, if you like, after a long story, came out of that space, that particular altered state of consciousness that I was in, I focused the end of my studies on this, recrediting the knowledge, spirituality and healing in 3 women's texts of the African diaspora, because that was my studies. My studies was literature. So these texts there, you can see, actually deal with healing, with different aspects of spirituality. Brother Shakara was mentioning about Kumina, and linked to Kumina is the practice that's called Mayo, which is in Jamaica as well. And all of them are coming out from African indigenous systems. I don't have time to go into any of these books. Beloved really is dealing with ancestors and how you can heal and work your way through understanding of the ancestors. So that's what I wanted to look at, because I wanted to understand what that thing that was happening to me, and there was nobody at that time that was able to explain to me what was going on. So I was seeking this out and trying to still at the same time use my studies to help me with that. Sorry, I've gone too far. And so I'm starting to understand about African spirituality. I'm going in and seeking that more and more. And here I'm just saying that is as vast and varied as the continent itself. But you know, it's a slow process of something triggers you, there's another bit, and all of these triggers are, you know, like it's like different lights. Like I think Brother Daniel was talking about the stars. If you look up at the sky, all of them are triggering you to look in to the interior self. And of course, I wanted to find something that was reflective of me, because as I said, I had rejected Christianity, which is my family's system. I had rejected their Jesus, their version of God. What does mine look like is what I'm looking at. And how is the version that looks like me, because I had been indoctrinated and led to believe that I was made in the image and the likeness of God. Well, what does the image and likeness of God look like for me? Well, it has to look like me. And if it looks like me, firstly, it's going to be a woman. Yes. So I had lots of contentions about this God in the sky that's a man thing. And then I would find this, it would look like me, and there was this dual energy anyway, this dual principle, as I would find later on when you look at especially ancient Kemetic or other of our systems, where this principle is very, very key to our practice. So one of the things then I would do, I had to go back and understand the ancestors. And I just wanted to read this. Ask your ancestors, so call on your ancestors. In moments of fear, stress, and the unknown, ask your departed ancestors for guidance and support. They have your back. You're a part of them, never apart from them. No matter what difficult situation you're currently facing, ask them to guide you along the path ahead. They can see the shortcuts and the pitfalls. Ask them to comfort and support you. Ask them for wisdom and clarity. They'll rise to meet and support you every time you ask. Relax, knowing that regardless of what you face, they have your back, silently encouraging you every step of the way. Now, I found this just randomly this morning on Facebook, and I thought, yes, it's relevant to what I'm trying to say. As well, I found this on the same site, and we can see there, we can see the power, we can see the magnitude. Imagine you knowing that Shaka Zulu or your grandfather as a Shaka Zulu is just there, like behind you, where you walk, where you go, what you're saying. They are just there. They are moving you. It's like it's a synergy that you cannot dismiss because it's so powerful. And the walk, of course, and those rituals that the others were talking about, the drum, the way you tap and call, or the way they even tap and call you to realize who you are. When you are doing that, your consciousness starts to expand in a particular way. So this was the Facebook group that I found that from. But on the image that I found, this was next to it. This was the comment. Yeah, I don't need to read this. It's just a regular thing, an everyday thing that you'll keep finding. If we post something that's to do with African ancestors, African spirituality, you will always find someone of us coming back at us with a version that denounces our systems. Well, it's now time, in my view, for us, those of us who know, those of us who understand, those of us who recognize the power of our rituals and recognize the power of what we are getting consciously from understanding our systems, to challenge this. Every time you see it, just challenge it, because it's like batting away flies, and then you're catching stars. You're catching those stars because your ancestors, your higher self, your divine self recognizes that you too are rejecting what is untruth, what is antithetical to your evolution, to your own spiritual development. I don't even need to spend time on the images below, but that is ultimately where a lot of our people are, is these images that can even be the cause of some of our depression, because the spirit, certainly, as Brother Daniel was saying, the spirit, that unseen presence that's within, knows what is the truth. And so the spirit is trying to call you to something, but you are rejecting that something spirit is calling you to, because you have other images, because you have other energies, because you have other forces that are jostling. And sometimes that jostling becomes a trigger where the spirit is trying to get you back to your source, yourself, to transform you, and you're actually fighting yourself. And so that can lead to what? It can lead to what they would call depression. It can then lead you into the institutions where they pump you with drugs and all sorts of things. So that's what all of that is really showing. Honoring the forces. So as well as the ancestors, after a while, or through it, I understood that I, indeed, as Professor Small says, I am a divine, I am one of the stars, I am having this particular and peculiar experience. And so, forces of nature, those things that, when you're just wandering around in the park or wherever, they start communicating with you in a different way, because you have battled away the things that are the debris, the negative things that are just assailing you, assailing your consciousness, preventing you from accessing that super conscious state that is it's part and parcel of who makes you up, what makes us up. So I have an affinity and a kind of a obsession, that's not necessarily the word, with rainbows. I just look at the sky, and I'm always communicating with the sky, trying to read the sky, because I know somewhere along the line I was doing all that stuff back in the day. I start to have a different understanding with the sea. I start to have a different understanding with the river, with leaves, with flowers, with whatever the sky is doing. So I am becoming my light. I am trying to reach for that light that is within, or to expand within and through that light that Brother Dali was even mentioning. So, for example, images like these or moments like these, when I see the light, it's like a twinkle, it's like that star or that light that's up there connecting with me. I tell it, I see you, and this is how I start to evolve. And it's kind of frozen again. And then these are some of the Orisha now. Brother Dali was mentioning it, so we do, and also Brother Shakara mentioned that we do this ritual where we go to the river. We tend to go for Oshun and to do an honor to her. And so that was because I was led to go to the river. Actually, I used to be going to the river because I wanted to be close to my ancestors initially. It was always about my ancestors for me. I didn't really have a full relationship that much with Orisha until much later. But this is just to show you there's a higher way of understanding the Orisha. One of them, the Urumila, would be to do with wisdom and knowledge and divination. The other, Yemaya, is also that, Yemaya is that sea. So when I go to the sea, I'm connecting with that particular cosmic reality and force, and I commune with that energy. There's a below part, which would be my subconscious self, and then there's a part that's just on the surface. That's just my everyday movement, and I go to that to commune. Ogun is about transformation. It's about, what we call Ogun is the god, they say, of war, but really it's more about justice. Ogun is one that the Aishans would have gone to defeat the Europeans in that most famous war of revolution. And so, yes, so then I start to become my I am, what we mostly understand as I am. We start to grow into this confidence of feeling more and more aligned, more and more attuned. That one is an image that is my kind of like the ocean-esque on the right. So then you start to have an affinity, a closer affinity with your ancestors. You create an altar for them in your house, so that you can have that communion, so that they can come whenever you want. And that's not like all the time, but they will come. They will commune with you. But bear in mind, your ancestors are you, so it's not like they're walking from somewhere, to reach you. They are, when I say altar, let's think of the altar then as that ori, as that part, that's your consciousness. That's what you're really focusing on, that's what you're working on. And I do workshop around ancestors, building your altar to them as well. And then you start to feel yourself becoming more and more consistently aligned. And then the very names, the different names that I had whilst I was doing this journey, broken, fractured, traumatized, depressed, whatever, the different states, the different names, I eventually become one that is Yaa Asantewa, because I'm now feeling more at one with a particular energy. And peace be upon Yaa Asantewa, because she passed away yesterday in 1921. So I'm just paying her that homage. And it was my birthday the day before. So I'm just making that alignment. And then as Brother Shakara mentioned, this is, and also Brother Dalian, about ritual. So now it's not an individual thing. We do ritual, yes, to honor our divine, but ultimately the rituals that we do is collective. It's one that brings us, and you see how that lovely circle that you're seeing, this is actually the last ritual that we did, which was phenomenal, and it looks like a light around us. There was a sister that was going with sage, and it's chosen to manifest itself as light, right? but those of us who were there, it was a sage. And it's just that circle that Brother Daniel was talking, Brother Shakara was talking about, that going around in a circle. We were doing that without anybody organising and telling us what to do. We were just doing that naturally, because each and every one of us who came to this ritual came with our divine, came with our ancestors. And now we're bringing the ancestors together in the sacred space, and that gives us a sense of power. So African spirituality then is about reclaiming individual and collective power, so that Africans as a group of peoples are empowered and energized from within and get our total energy from our own self source. And this is just to mention, because I know it wasn't mentioned, that we're actually, this is an aspect of our resistance, is to demand that our spiritual and indigenous systems are recognized, because presently they are not recognized in the UK, and actually wherever we are, they're demonized and they're given short shrift. So this is our petition that we're doing so that that happens. And I thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you.